Hello, welcome to a podcast. And today we are going to discuss why growth is important and why we should ignite growth. And you already know, if you are following us on our social media platforms, Advocata is organizing this great conference on 22nd and 23rd of January at the BMICH about growth, ignite growth. And if you have been following us, we did one conference in 2022 about resetting the economy, and very importantly we did another one in 2024 about governance, about the IMF governance diagnostic report, and now we are moving to growth. And joining with me today is Murtaza Jafferjee, chairperson of Advocate Institute. Murtaza, thank you very much for joining this conversation. Glad to have you. And first, tell us why growth is important. I mean, if you look at the elections, everything, it was about anti-corruption, there was an economic crisis. Why growth? Isn't that better to go back to stability or governance? Why growth?
So the fundamental aspiration of all human beings is to improve the quality of their life. And to make the improvements of life to be sustainable, it is about creating high economic growth. Now, there is economic growth that can be done with a sugar high, like you can do reducing interest rates, or fiscally stimulating, where the government spends a lot more than it raises through revenue. Unfortunately, this was the growth model that we had in the post-conflict era. The civil conflict finished in May 2009. And then, of course, there was a significant amount of the economy that was not producing. All that came into production. So we had fairly high growth for 2 to 3 years. But by 2013, the benefit of the post-conflict era started waning. And in 2012, we tried to overstimulate the economy and we had our first currency crisis. But since those 2 to 3 years of catch-up growth, 10, 11, 12, growth has been coming down. Now, we had 4 to 5 crisis years, starting with 2019, where we had the shock from the Easter bombing. In 2018, we had the constitutional coup. In 2020, we had COVID. Then we became vulnerable from 2021, and 2022, we defaulted on our debt. So some of those years we had deep negative growth. And although this year has been a relatively good year, today the central bank governor in his monetary policy outlook speech said that in 2024 they are estimating the growth was 5%. We are still below where we were in 2018. So hopefully that if we have a reasonably good year in 2025, we will come back to where we were in 2018. Now, this is still catch-up growth. That this is growth because the economy is operating below capacity. So hotels are not full, demand is still weak, companies have excess capacity. Now, what do we do thereafter? How do we continue to grow? And our problem is that we are still carrying a lot of debt. At the peak, when you look at what is called the public debt, which includes central government and the SOE debt and central bank debt, it was 128%. Now, I don't have the exact figure what it was at the end of 2024 because the statistics have still not come out, but the expectation was that it will come down to about 110%. Now, there is no red line of how much debt you should be carrying, but it's generally expected that a middle income market access country like Sri Lanka, it should be about 60%. So even on the debt sustainability analysis, that in 10 years time, our debt is only going down to 95%. Now, one indicator of debt is debt to GDP. So you have a numerator and a denominator. And if you break that down to contributing components, one is the fiscal side, something called the primary balance. So that is your revenue minus expenditure without interest. Then you have something called the R minus G effect, which means that the R is the real interest rate on our debt, which is very high, right? Because a lot of debt was issued during the crisis. 1.9 trillion rupees of domestic debt was issued out of 9 trillion on middle of 2023 when the debt restructuring, domestic debt restructuring was done. That debt only about 400 to 500 billion got restructured, which was held by the superannuation funds. But about 1.5 trillion of that, which was issued at an average interest rate of 27%, which never got restructured, is still with us. It will take some years for it uh, to mature. Some of it will take up till 2032 or 2033. And since we have to issue a lot of debt longer term to address another debt indicator called gross financing needs, which is the amount of financing that we need to do at any one given year. So at one point of time, because we were running a very large primary balance deficit, not only did we have to fund that primary balance deficit, which was at 1.6% of GDP, it came down to 4%, but we also had to roll over a lot of short-term debt. Now from 30%, we have been told to bring it down to 13%, which means that a lot of the short-term maturity debt has to be reissued at much higher interest rates. Much higher maturities. So I believe there's a bond auction coming up this week. The maturities are 2028, 2030 and 2032. Now we don't have a lot of investors at the longer end of the market, right? So you have to pay a big premium to get people to invest at that end of the market. And going by current market prices, we may probably be issuing 2032 debt at about 11.4%. Now inflation at the moment is negative. Even if we get to our target inflation rate of 5%, which the governor hopes will happen in the second half of the year, that's what he said this morning. If you take the real cost of debt, then 11 minus 5 is about 6%. So the real interest rates on our debt is going to continue to be very high. And it's a twin-edged sword that we are celebrating stability, that we have a new central bank law and they have a mandate to control inflation at 5%. We can't inflate our problem away. So because we didn't restructure our debt sufficiently, there is an intergenerational problem that a lot of this debt will have to be paid back by future generations. Normally how you would do it is you just inflate the problem away. Unfortunately, because the focus has been on macro stability, that is no longer an option for us. So coming back to the R minus G problem, the R minus G problem means that R is the real interest rate at the numerator, which is the debt is at. The G is the denominator, GDP. So R minus G should be a negative number, which means that your denominator is growing faster than your numerator. And in our case, the numerator is 110% of the denominator. So you have to adjust for that higher numerator effect, plus the fact that G has to be more than R. And the third contribution is from the external sector, because about 40% now that the currency has appreciated, we are carrying close to about 10 to 11 trillion in foreign debt and about 18 trillion in domestic debt. The foreign debt now that we have restructured is at fairly low interest rates, although there's a step up function on that. And even the international sovereign bonds have a value recovery feature. So although at the moment it's a 27% haircut, It's more likely by the time we pay it, there is a period in 2028 where it will get reset. It will probably be only a haircut of 10 or 12% or 15%. So our problem is that we will have to grow the economy at a faster rate than the real rate of interest. And the real rate of interest will remain for quite a number of years because we have tamed inflation. And because we will have high real interest rates, it will discourage consumption, which is needed for economic growth. So you are now incentivized to save, unlike previously. And when you have high rates of real interest, you will also have to ration investment because it's not every investment project that is profitable, that only the high return are profitable. So since we have all these growth headwinds, the only lever that is left for us is to do more with less, which is productivity. So growth is important because even on the fiscal side, for us to continue to post the primary balance surplus. Now this, if I am not mistaken, in 2024, the primary balance target was 1.7% of GDP and we have achieved 3%. Now we didn't achieve this purely by overachieving on the revenue side. It mainly came by cutting expenditure, capital expenditure. So they budgeted something like 1.7 trillion and we ended up spending about 600 billion or something. So if you cut capital expenditure, and we have been under-investing for the last 5 years, during all this crisis period, investment collapsed basically, especially on the government side. So your capacity in the economy has come down, right? So just to give you an example, like the Central Expressway phase 1, since 2015 we are trying to build it, So you have a phase 2 and there is no connectivity to Colombo, so you have to go through, so all the benefit of a good highway is lost because that crucial part is missing. There was somebody I met this morning and he was saying that he was in the airport last night and it was a mess because so many aircrafts coming in the night and it can't cope, because we need a new terminal. I think the president also admitted. So growth is so important because even on the fiscal side, if growth increases, there is something called tax buoyancy, which means that the tax grows at a faster rate than economic growth. And the explanation to that is that when economies grow, profits increase, so you pay more taxes. People have more income from bonuses, from overtime, so they go and buy discretionary items which have higher tax incident on that. So that's how that tax buoyancy effect comes in. So growth will solve a lot of Sri Lanka's problems. And that is why growth is important, not only to make sure that we don't fall again, but to ensure that there is steady improvement in the quality of life of our people.
So that's why I think the long explanation on why growth is important. And on this 2-day conference, we are going to on the first day, we are going to understand the barriers for growth. And the second day, we are going to discuss about productivity, which Murtaza broadly spoke about, because investment is going to be difficult with high real interest rates. And at the same time, we have lot of debt. And because of that, with those challenges, we have to move with productivity. So if you are going to buy tickets, please go to our website. There's a special website on the event. It's called ignite.advocata.org. IGNITE, ignite.advocata.org. And if you are buying tickets now, watching our live session till 12 midnight, then you will have a special merchant gift from Advocata, and the price of a ticket is 20,000 rupees for 2 days, all inclusive food, refreshment. And you should know that we are not keeping a margin on the ticket. It's basically covering your own food cost and the other event logistics. We wish that we could offer a price discount, but it's basically covering the cost of the food and the rest of the cost component. So buy the tickets because it's already there's about 25% of the tickets are being sold. So we have 2 more weeks, so buy tickets and you can get a merch gift from Advocata if you're buying it before 12 midnight today. So go to ignite.advocata.org and then buy tickets. It's 20,000 rupees. So again, you can follow us all the content on our social media platform, how to buy a ticket. So please make sure that if you have any questions, you can call us on our office line, and we are happy to provide any information. If you are going to go bulk purchase, please let us know, and the website itself will facilitate that. Murtaza, so the first day is about, from the agenda, it's of understanding the barriers for growth. So the first session we have is at 9:30 under the topic of forecasting growth, a look ahead, with a representative from the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. So what is it going to entail, and why someone should buy a ticket and listen to this session, and what is going to come out from that session?
So the central bank basically, now under the new law, its primary mandate is inflation targeting. So what we are hoping that this presentation will explain to us, perhaps more qualitatively than quantitatively, because the quantitative analysis will take a bit of time, is to explain what the growth potential is. So they conduct monetary policy based on what the growth potential is. So that will give you the baseline at what rate our economy can grow at. Because now under inflation targeting rate, I mean, one way to accelerate the speed of the economy is to have loose monetary policy. But the problem is that if they try to overstimulate, you'll get inflation, which goes against their own core mandate. So we thought the best way to start this conference, because the first day is really understanding the constraints to growth, for them to explain to us what they think the potential growth is going to be, but it may be more qualitative than quantitative.
So since you spoke about the new central bank law, so isn't there a contradiction, because central banks, even the governor today mentioned his core mandate is price stability, and now how growth is, you explained it, but isn't there a contradiction how the central bank is going to think about the monetary policy with growth targets, and how do you reconcile that?
So the easiest way to understand this is their real mandate is sound money. Now, it's commonly known that Sri Lankans don't have much high regard for their own currency. That is why even the poor people go and buy vehicles or motorcycles, because they see that as a real asset. Nobody wants to have Sri Lankan rupees. But if the central bank carries out their mandate, maybe holding real assets. In every other country, vehicle prices in nominal terms come down in value. Only Sri Lanka, basically, it holds its price. So they have to now practice sound money, which is their core mandate. Their mandate is not growth. Right? They can support policies of the government, but their primary objective, which is written in law, is price stability. Second one is, the other objective is financial stability. So it's not the role of the central bank basically to create growth. That is the role of government. And the role of government is to create the right kind of environment for economic activity to take place. And I'm afraid that some of it may be of the government really getting out of the way and allowing the market to operate.
Okay, so so that's why you should be there for the very first session, a review, forecasting growth, a look ahead by the central bank, and then we are moving to understanding the demographic dynamics, opportunities and challenges as the second session. And again, I just want to recall you that buy tickets, ignite.advocata.org, 20,000 is the price of a ticket, and we are going to cover 2 days. First on constraints about growth on the first day, day one, and day two about the productivity. So how come the connectivity between from forecasting growth, a look ahead by the central bank, and what is the relationship of the demographic dynamics?
So there is an old adage often overused called demographics is destiny, because our average lifespan is now close to 80 years. It's a bit higher for females than males. Now, our demographics are not similar to our South Asian neighbors. There are two dynamics going on. That the median age, the middle guy in the population is about 33 years. And we have a very fast aging population, that the cohort, the proportion of people above the age of 60 is very rapidly increasing, right? And the number of young people, the rate at which it is growing is probably at the rate of population growth. So there was a time when the number of people at the economically active age was growing faster than the rate of growth of the population. That is called the demographic dividend. In our case, we still are having some growth, but there was a time when it was growing like 2 times the speed at which the population was growing. So if the population was growing at say 1%, the economically active age was growing at 2%. So you had a large bulge, youth bulge coming in. That bulge effect ran out about 10 years ago. Now India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, they are all enjoying that demographic dividend, what is called the demographic dividend. Our demographic dividend was happening, started about 20 years ago. Most of it is gone now. Right? So that benefit of a large youth bulge who will come and expand the workforce, that is now gone, mostly gone. And we had a very high child dependency at one point of time. Now we are transitioning to an old age dependency. So we will have to now support a lot of old people. And if we are going to be a society that, is a civilized society, we will have to care for these people. And it will have tremendous social impacts also, this nuclear family. So our healthcare burden, now if you take the child dependency and the old age dependency, in old age the cost to the state is much higher than as a child. Of course there is a cost of education, etc., which is a state funded activity, but it is said that in the last 6 months of your life, your healthcare costs account for something like 40% of your total life cost. So this old age dependency cost is rapidly rising. And unfortunately, we don't have a universal superannuation system, pension system, where those people have saved for retirement. Because we only have a pension system with the government. That is 15% of the labor force. And that is also unfunded. It is currently at about 2% of GDP. It is projected to go to 4%. So that has huge repercussions about the retirement age. And, we will also look at, how many people, for example, it's very hard to divorce in Sri Lanka. But if it becomes easier to divorce, a lot of marital units will dissolve. So demographics has a big bearing on the direction of the economy and direction of demand also, because older people require different products. It has a big ramification to savings, because when your population is aging, you generally tend to accrue much more savings. So that is why that session is there.
So if you are a corporate leader, if you are thinking about that you can attract a very attractive workforce, the future may be slightly different than what you think. You are thinking about setting up creches and all that at the workforce and at your workplace. Now things are going to be different, because probably in the next decade or so, your workforce has to stay at home to take care of their parents rather than taking care of their children. And you have to think completely different. And as a public policy point of view, the government's regulation and their labor regulation has to be think completely on a different way. And that's why you need to be there for the second session on day one of our Ignite
Plus,
Growth.
there will be also an opportunity to sell a whole bunch of new products that older people will require, including financial products.
Absolutely. So it's not about the constraint. At the same time, if you're in the insurance industry or financial markets, there'll be new opportunities to think about. There's a new market segment that you have a lot of products and market opportunities to sell. So that's another reason why you should be there. Again, buy tickets, go to ignite.advocata.org, and then you can purchase tickets. And Professor Laxman Disanayaka from
He's
University of
a
Colombo.
emeritus professor of demographics.
So he
And
will
he was
be
a former vice chancellor of the Colombo University.
So he will be joining for this session. So please watch. And the uniqueness of our conference is we have less panel discussions. We have solid content. Known speakers who have studied the subject is going to share their knowledge with you. It's not about just sitting on a panel discussion and listening to a bunch of opinions. It's all about facts and figures and solid content. So please come with your notebooks or iPads or where you can take down notes, because content will be valuable. Of course, you will have the access for most of it later on, the video content and some of the presentations. But we want to make it a real learning experience where you come, take down notes and learn about it and use it on your business cases, because what we all need is ignite growth for Sri Lanka. And if you only grow, the businesses will benefit, Sri Lankans will benefit, the government and everyone else will be benefited. So that's the story. Again, purchase tickets. You have a special offer till midnight today. With a special merch gift from Advocata. And then we are going to discuss about understanding the workforce and insights from the economic census, and some representative from the census department and about the labor force and the economic survey is expected to join. So we are going to understand about the credit growth and the central bank's overview about on the growth, and then we are understanding about the demography and then the workforce. Tell us a little bit about on this session.
So there is a population of about 22 million people, Dhananath. And the economically active workforce is about 17 million people. That's about the amount of voters we had. So that's a population of about 18. But of course, all of that 17 million, some of them are old people who can't work, they're in retirement. But if you take the economically active population, only about 50% are in the workforce. Right? So our labor force is 50% of the economically active population. So economists call it the labor participation rate. And with the males, it's about 70%, and the females, it's about 35%. Now, the labor force survey that is done by the Department of Census and Statistics kind of tries to identify and quantify where people are working. Now, you'll be surprised to see that almost 70% of the labor force is in the informal sector. Right? They are not in these big mercantile companies. And the economic census, which was done in 2013-14, kind of tried to identify all the establishments in Sri Lanka. And interestingly, about 91% of that 1 million establishments were entities with 4 or less people. So there's a lot of micro enterprise in Sri Lanka. You know, your butcher, your barber, your cobbler. So a lot of this. And generally, you know, the productivity of these entities are quite low. So our economy is characterized by some very highly productive enterprises, but a very, very long tail of low productivity. So the focus of this session is to understand where people are working, where the jobs are, the types of jobs, and the type of establishments in which they are working. Because the second day is when we address about productivity, but you've got to understand where the jobs are and what the people are doing. So how can we get them to different types of jobs?
Okay, so that's the reason why you should be there for the third session. And again, the link for to purchase tickets is in the description and on the live chat on YouTube and on our Facebook feed. So please go and buy tickets. Again, a reminder about the promotion today. It's only available for today. If you are buying a ticket before 12 midnight today, you will have a special merch gift from Advocata Institute. And then we are coming after the lunch break for the first keynote speaker. That's fireside chat on gambling on development with Stefan Derkon. He's a professor from University of Oxford. Tell us what is this book about and what's the theory of how shall I say the theory of gambling on development and why should Sri Lanka should join this gamble?
So I first met Professor Stefan Derkon 2 years ago at the height of the economic crisis. He was brought here by the UK High Commission. He was the head of the UK's development agency. And now he is a professor at Oxford. And he, throughout he's Belgian origin, but he's working in the UK. He had spent a significant part of his career on economic development in many developing countries in Africa, in Southeast Asia, South Asia. So he wrote this book called Gambling on Development, where he basically says that it's the elite of a country. They can either do what is called the elite bargain, where the people in power, it's not only the politicians, because it cuts across many dimensions of society, all get together and say we want to develop a country. Or the elite decide that they want to extract for their benefit. So for quite a number of years, we have had regimes and a pseudo elite who have lined up their pockets. And more so than what they plundered, the policy blunders were 10 times more costlier, because many policies were enacted with the expectation of helping the poor, but it ended up helping the rich. So I have asked our former governor, Dr. Indrajit Kumaraswamy, to be the interlocutor with Professor Stefan Derkon, where he will have a discussion with Stefan about his book. And he gives a lot of good examples of countries that failed and countries that developed.
So that's the first keynote speech, and he will be joining virtually online, Stefan Derkon, and Dr. Kumaraswamy will be joining from BMICH. So that would be a very interesting, insightful session. So please be there, because there's a connectivity on the process. First, you understand about the central bank, and then central bank's growth. I mean, how are they going to manage the monetary policy, helping growth, and then about the demography, and then about the workforce, and then on gambling on development. Again, the description, the link is in the description. Please go and buy tickets, and till midnight today, you have a special offer, and you can follow us on all social media platforms. And we discussed about the first half of the program. For the benefit of our Sinhala viewers, I'll quickly give a very short Sinhala summary. අනිවාර්යෙන් මෙන්න ජනවාරි මාසේ 22 23 BMICH එකේ තියෙන්නේ අපේ ප්‍රධාන කොන්ෆරන්ස් එක Ignite Growth. ඔයගොල්ලෝ දන්නවා ඇඩ්වොකාටා වැඩක් කරොත් අනිවාර්යයෙන්ම අපේ content තමයි අපේ තියෙන ප්‍රධානම strength එක. ඉතින් ඒක නිසා අනිවාර්යෙන් content බලන්න අනිවාර්යෙන් මෙන්න 22 23 ටිකට්ස් මිලදී ගන්න පුළුවන්. link එක තියෙනවා description එකේ. රුපියල් 20000ක් වෙනවා ටිකට් එක. අපි කිසිම ලොකු margin එකක් තියාගන්න කැමරටයි ඔක්කොම ගියාට පස්සේ දවස් දෙකේම all inclusive තමයි රුපියල් 20000. ඉතින් අද රෑ 12 වෙනකන් ටිකට්ස් මිලදී ගන්නවා නම් අපේ වෙබ්සයිට් එක කරා ignite.advocata.org තමයි අපේ වෙබ්සයිට් එක. ඉතින් ඒකට ගිහිල්ලා ගන්නවා නම් ටිකට් එකක් අද අනිවාර්යයෙන්ම ස්පෙෂල් මර්චන්ට් ගිෆ්ට් එකක් තියෙනවා. අද රෑ 12 වෙනකන් ටිකට්ස් ගන්න හැමෝටම. ඉතින් ඒක නිසා අනිවාර්යයෙන්ම මේ කොන්ෆරන්ස් එකට එකතු වෙන්න. අපි කතා කරා පළවෙනි සෙෂන්ස් ටිකේ මොනවද වෙන්නේ දවස් දෙකක කොන්ෆරන්ස් එකක්. පළවෙනි සෙෂන් එක 9ට පටන් ගන්නේ පළවෙනි දවසේ. ඉතින් මුලින්ම සෙන්ට්‍රල් බැංක් එකෙන් පැහැදිලි කරනවා මොනිටරි පොලිසි එකත් එක්ක ලංකාවේ ආර්ථික වර්ධනය මොන විදිහටද යන්නේ. මේ වෙලාවේ අපිට තියෙන ප්‍රධානම එක තමයි ලංකාවේ ආර්ථිකය වර්ධනය කරන්න. නැත්නම් අපිට යන්නේනමක් නැති වෙනවා. මොකද දැන් එක පැත්තකින් අපිට විශාල ණය ප්‍රමාණයක් තියෙනවා. ඒ වගේම පොලි අනුපාත වල තියෙන තත්ත්වයක් එක්ක අපිට ඉන්වෙස්ට්මන්ට් කරගන්න අමාරුයි. ඉතින් ඒ වගේම අපේ විශාල වශයෙන් ප්‍රාග්ධන වියදම් ගොඩක් කපලා තියෙන්නේ. හයිවේස් හදන ඒවා එකක්වත් කරන්න ආණ්ඩුවට සල්ලි නැහැ. ඒ නිසා කාර් කාර්යක්ෂමතාවය වැඩි කළා තමයි අපිට මේ ආර්ථික වර්ධනය ගන්න වෙන්නේ. ඒ නිසා පළවෙනි වතාවේදී පළවෙනි සෙෂන් එකේ අපි කතා කරනවා මොනිටරි පොලිසි එකෙන් කොහොමද මේක මැනේජ් කරන්න කියලා. ඊට පස්සේ අපි කතා කරනවා අපේ ඩිමොග්‍රැෆි එක ගැන. මොකද දැන් ඉස්සර වගේ නෙමෙයි ලංකාවේ තියෙන්නේ ටිකක් වයසට යන ජනගහනයක් ඉන්නේ. ඒ නිසා හිතන තරම් ලේසියෙන් බිස්නස් ඩෙවලොප් කරන්න කට්ටිය හොයාගන්න අමාරුයි. ඒ වගේම ඊට පස්සේ අපි කතා කරනවා අනාගතයේ තියෙන ජොබ්ස් මොන වගේ දේවල් වලින්ද තියෙන ලංකාවේ ඉස්සරහට ගන්න නම්. මොකද අපි හිතන ජොබ්ස් නෙවෙයි දැන් ඉස්සරහට එන්නේ. ඒ වගේම අපේ වයසට යන වර්ක් ෆෝස් එකත් එක්ක තත්ත්වය අමාරු වෙනවා. ඊට පස්සේ අපේ තියෙනවා කීනෝට් සෙෂන් එක. ඊට පස්සේ අපි සෙන්සස් එකත් එක්ක කතා කරනවා කිව්වා වගේම අපේ ඉකොනොමික් සෙන්සස් ගැන. ඊට පස්සේ ලන්ච් බ්‍රේක් එකට පස්සේ අපි කතා කරනවා අපේ ෆස්ට් කීනෝට් එක ගැම්බ්ලින් ඔන් ඩිවෙලොප්මන්ට් ගැන. ස්ටෙෆාන් ඩර්කෝන් මහත්මයා ඔක්ස්ෆර්ඩ් විශ්වවිද්‍යාලයේ මේ ගැම්බ්ලින් ඔන් ඩිවෙලොප්මන්ට් කියන පොත ලියපු මහාචාර්යවරයා. ඒ වගේම ලංකාවේ හිටපු කීර්තිමත් මහ බැංකුව අධිපතිවරයා වෙච්ච ඉන්ද්‍රජිත් කුමාරස්වාමි මහත්මයා මේ සාකච්ඡාව මෙහෙවන්න සම්බන්ධ වෙනවා. ඒක තමයි අපි මෙච්චරලා කතා කරේ. Okay Murtaza, so then after that keynote speech we are going to have another conversation about Vision 2048. That's about 100 years celebrating independence, about the National Physical Development Plan with Mr. Ruchira Vitana, the Director General at the National Physical Planning Department. So how does it connect from starting from the central bank on gambling development? What is the National Fiscal Development Plan and how does it connect with growth and constraints for growth?
So physical plan.
National Physical Plan.
Right. So infrastructure is now infrastructure enables growth. Right. So to give you a simple example, if you have insufficient roads and if you are in traffic jams all day, then a lot of productive capacity is lost. Right. So at any level of economic development, you need an appropriate mix of infrastructure. Now what we did previously is we built certain types of excessive amount of infrastructure in certain types, and we went and built infrastructure where it was not needed, and nothing was properly thought through and planned. So my understanding is that this Vision 2048 has an infrastructure plan showing where the priorities of the government are and the type of infrastructure that needs to be done. So previously, for political expediency, we went and did things. Like for example, I don't think Hambantota port was one of the priority areas. It was always there in the plans, but it was not a priority area. So this sequencing of the infrastructure is very important because infrastructure takes a long period of time to pay off. So in the sequencing, I hope the policymakers have identified what will give us the biggest bang for the buck. So we need to understand what the plans of the government are, and that is why we have invited somebody from the government who has developed this plan to share with us what the plan is.
So that's why you should, again, as a corporate leader, as an industry leader, even if you're a government politician, that's the reason why you should be there, because when you're planning your industries ahead, you should know where the government is going to invest under this National Physical Development Plan, because then you know where the road connectivity is coming on and where the urban development is going to come on, and then you can develop your logistics and infrastructure based on that. And to know that, you have to be at our conference buying tickets, and we are planning to invite main key government officials as invitations, as invitees, because they should also know, because when they know, they can do better service on the public policy front, which will help your businesses to grow. But with that, you have to be there to understand the sequencing and everything pretty much about Sri Lanka's growth, and that's the only way out from crisis. And then Murtaza, afterwards we have the next session starting at 3:30, building credit infrastructure for growth, and that will be done by Pushpika Jayasundara, the Director General and Manager at Credit Information Bureau of Sri Lanka, which is famously known as CRIB. So what's the connectivity of CRIB and constraints for growth?
So there is a very strong relationship between where credit flows, because credit drives the economic machine. We have, I believe, about 8 million borrowers in Sri Lanka, And the Credit Information Bureau, which at some time the politicians have criticized, which is completely misplaced, has done a huge benefit by permitting more credit to go to the subprime segment. So all the CRIP does is basically it has a record of who has lent to whom. Right? There is no evil that the CRIP does. So that if I am a prospective lender and I can understand your credit history and who else has lent to you, then I am in a better position to evaluate your credit worthiness and lend to you. So I've asked Pushpika basically to share with us a lot of insights that they have about how credit has been distributed in Sri Lanka, who's got what at segmental level, and to what type of activity, and the delinquency levels, how the credit is performing, what has been good credit, what is struggling, so that there's a better understanding of how credit is distributed, and we can also think about how we can get more credit to go to people who don't have access to credit and what kind of government policies. So for example, I believe, I don't know whether it has enacted, but the government is going to give a guarantee scheme. So instead of the government trying to lend to the subprime sector, they will give a backstop to financial entities to do the lending. But if the credit experience is going to be far worse than expected, they will then backstop those losses. Right? You can get a lot more bang for your buck with that kind of mechanism than any other kind of subsidy which then goes to the wrong type of people. So hopefully this is also a very illuminating session where you really start understanding how credit is distributed and how it is going down the different levels.
So imagine the depth of the conversation. We first start about central bank, and then about the demography, and then about the future of jobs and what is the job distribution in Sri Lanka, and then with on gambling on development, understanding the theoretical framework, why the elites of a country think about and decide on development, and then we are going to discuss about the insights from CRIB, because ultimately if you are a banker, if you are a financial institute, then you should be able to have better information, better rating on how are you going to lend, because ultimately for development you need money and you are not saving everything, you have to borrow money, and to borrow money you have to have a better credit system where you can evaluate the credit worthiness better. And then we are coming to the final session of the day, that is to empower to prosper women working for growth. That is.
I think you missed one of the other ones, which was on trade.
Yes.
So let me explain that there will be a session on trade, because trade, external trade, is fundamental for economic growth. We are 22 million people in this country. The world's population is coming close to 8 billion. We can't make everything that we need. Therefore, we have to buy from the rest of the world. But there are certain things that we can make in this country, and we can export services that the rest of the world needs from us. There is a misplaced thinking that we should look inwards, this mercantilist tradition that we like to export but not import, or we should be self-sufficient. We should be self-sufficient on very few things, because we are not endowed with all the natural resources in the world. So we should buy things from the rest of the world where it makes sense to buy, and we should sell to the rest of the world where it makes sense that we have a natural competitive advantage. Therefore, what I have asked Miss Anne, who is from the World Bank, to explain the link between trade and growth. And the link is extremely strong, because if we are going to build an export economy, Currently, in the last 20 years, the contribution of exports to economic growth in Sri Lanka has been abysmally low. If you compare with a sheer success story like Vietnam, whose exports of merchandising trade over 20 years went up by 15 times, while Sri Lanka it went up only 3 times. They are importing a lot of products and exporting a lot of products. They also have economic and trade agreements with many countries. They are members of something called a regional trading body called RCEP. But we have been completely, our growth has been totally focused domestically. It has not come on the external sector. So trade is the most important element of growth, because a significant amount of economic output in Sri Lanka are what are called tradable sectors. And it is through trade that competition comes. And competition is the prerequisite for productivity improvement, because none of us will do our best unless there is competition. Very few of us can self actualize and push ourselves. Most of us need to compete. I mean, if you take a race, if you are going to run a race on your own and you have to run a race with 3 to 4 other people, I can bet you most of you will run faster when you have to run with other people.
So that's the reason why you have to be at our conference to understand about trade. And we have a very interesting, exciting speaker from the World Bank who has, uh, uh, in-depth experience working in Pakistan and working in the region, and bringing the cases of Vietnam. And I think when you meant
Thailand.
and Thailand and Thailand. So join us. This is going to be again insightful, and as you can see, the uniqueness of our conference is it's not about just conversations. There will be one solid speaker who will be delivering the content, and the speaker will have about 20 to 25 minutes, maximum 30 minutes, and then we will move to questions for the next 15 minutes. So you have like direct access to ask questions and get your queries clarified, and that's the uniqueness of our conference. So buy tickets. Again, the link is in the description, and you have a special offer till midnight today. And the final session is about empower to prosper, women working for growth, why it is important. And tell us a little bit about the speaker as well, Murtaza.
So from a sequencing perspective, Dhananath, should have come earlier in the day. But unfortunately, Maritso is going to be presenting virtually from Washington, D.C. So it's a more civilized hour. It will be 6:40 in the morning for him. Unlike if he did it early in the day, it will be like 2 a.m. in the morning. So Maritso, who has been in this studio and come number of times to Sri Lanka, is overlooking South Asia. South Asia. He's an economist at the World Bank from Washington, D.C., working on South Asia. And in the most recent South Asia Development Report, Chapter 2, which is always the more in-depth area, is on the problem of female labor force participation. This is a huge problem in whole of South Asia. In Sri Lanka, it's 35%. I think in Bangladesh, because of the large garment industry, it's a little bit higher. In Pakistan, it's even lower. In India, it's slightly lower. So, Mao famously said, women hold up half the world. In China, the female labor force participation is 70%. In Vietnam, it's 80%. In Sri Lanka, half our human capacity is not in the labor force, right? So there is a huge amount of potential that, as I explained, the demographics are not going to give us the labor supply. We have to create a lot of jobs for women. So Maritso will share with us the experience of their study, which was recently concluded. There are demand side factors and supply side factors. And this new government has to really focus on getting more women to come to the labor force and creating the kind of jobs that women can do.
So that's the reason, I think when you think about growth and development, women plays a pivotal role. And if you're following Advocata Institute, we have done many studies about this issue and how we can empower women and get them into our labor force. So that's the wrap for the first day. And as you can see, it's a long list of sessions with solid content. So please buy tickets till midnight today. You have a special promo, and you can go through you have the access for this agenda on our website. Go to ignite.advocata.org so you can slowly go through and understand what are we planning to deliver on day one. It's at the BMICH, all inclusive, 20,000, and this will be very, very useful, and the content will be in English. So please make sure that you be there and see us on 22nd and 23rd of January. And with that, we are moving to the second day, which is a completely a new structure. New structure in the sense we have been speaking about the constraints and on the pretty much the macro level of growth. And now on day two, it's all about productivity in action. And how are we going to start the session on day two, Murtaza? From the agenda, it's Sudharaka, who's our colleague, Sudharaka Ariratna, will be presenting about platform companies and revolutionizing business models. Tell us a little bit about these business models and how does it help on growth?
So, what I have asked Sudharaka to do is to explain the economics behind platform companies. Now, platforms are two-sided marketplaces. You have a market on the demand side and a market on the supply side. Platform economics are a little bit different from the normal economics that apply to brick and mortar companies. Now, platform companies are now dominating increasingly the digital economy. And I have asked him as an economist to give a framework about how to think about platform companies. I've also asked him to talk a little bit about something called matching markets. Now, matching markets are markets that are not commoditized. So they have a little bit different type of economics to allow the demand side and the supply side and solve the allocation problem of who gets what. Alvin Roth, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2012, wrote a book also called Who Gets What. And he was very famous for designing a market for kidney transplants. About schools, most of the work was done in the United States. But there are many takeaways for us to create these matching markets to solve a lot of problems in Sri Lanka and how to use platforms to solve some of those problems. So this is a bit of a primer, because we are limited with the time, to explain platform economics and matching markets.
So with that introduction with Sudharaka, we are trying to get three main platforms. Actually, we are getting three main platform companies. First is Meta, and then Booking.com, and then our local networking company, PickMe, on driving mobility solutions. So tell us why, Murtaza, these three industries? Because Meta is something different, Bookings is more on the tourism side, and lodging services, and PickMe is more on the mobility side. Why these three industries, and what a visitor or someone who's buying a ticket, spending 20,000, what can they get from taking part on these conversations?
So all these companies, except for PickMe, which is a local version, but these are business models that have worked globally. First of all, they are enabling these two-sided marketplaces. So in the case of Booking.com, there is a market for lodgers, people who want to go and stay a night, and there's a market for people who want to provide lodging. In the case of PickMe, there is a market for riders and there's a market for drivers. That is this two-sided marketplace. Now, what these platforms allow is very long tails. So I had done some research 5 years ago where more than 50% of the room inventory available in Sri Lanka was coming from establishments that had less than 20 rooms. And I would reckon that I believe Booking.com has about 10,000 listings, that the long tail has got longer. So it is allowing the small man to come and compete. And they solve what is called the information asymmetry problem through these platforms. So for example, a brand, you have confidence in going and stay, because most people only go once to a hotel. The repeat behavior is very low. I mean, you think about your own travels, it's it's highly unlikely you will, as a tourist, go back to the same place again. Some people do, but most people don't. So it's probably the first time you are visiting a hotel room. So how do you get the confidence of going? Because you don't know the product, right? You have a huge information asymmetry. You haven't stayed there before. So normally the brands play a big role. That if it's a Hilton or a Holiday Inn, you assume that the brand will give you that quality. But what these platforms have permitted us to do is to allow people who stayed there to rate them. So people have photographs, people have reviews. So that whole information asymmetry problem, to some extent, that market failure, because somebody can tell you something and your experience will be far worse, so then you're reluctant to pay a premium, you solve through this platform. Similarly with taxis, if you have bad actors, because these are not branded taxis, right? They're all free agents. That if you have bad actors, there is a huge disincentive for them to behave badly. So the platform kind of tries to address that problem. Also, it allows incremental supply. So if you take this taxi hailing, not all the drivers are full-time drivers. So when you have surge pricing, or when the demand picks up, some of these drivers come, or they don't have to work full time. So that's what the whole gig economy and sweating infrastructure. So it has huge ramifications of how, Dhananath, we can sweat our assets. Because remember, the second day's focus is on productivity, doing more with less. So how do we sweat more of our assets? Now, for example, under booking.com, if you have a house, a homestay, you could add 1 room, 2 rooms and sell that. You could get somebody to come and stay with you. In fact, I myself have done that in the UK, and I preferred it than any hotel. Right? It's an experience that a hotel can't provide, and a lot of people want that authentic experience and that people to people connection. So it is these platforms that are enabling all this. It's technology that is enabling all of this. So we want to demonstrate the power of these platforms and the role that they can play going forward. So the policymakers and the public should really understand them.
So now you understand the importance of understanding these case studies. And again, on the second day, we are mainly targeting on the case studies, because then we have a experience and we know what it is all about. And we have the experts from these industries who can speak and share their productivity case and how actually it affects the growth of Sri Lanka and growth in the industry. So those are the first 3 sessions of till about 11 o'clock, till about 11:50. And then we move to a fireside chat with Dr. Hans Vijay Surya. Hopefully he will confirm. And it will be with me. I'll be having a chat with Dr. Hans. And what's the connection, Murtaza, on the digitization? So we spoke about the macro side, and on the productivity, how do you connect the digitization?
I would characterize Hans as being Sri Lanka's digital czar. So I don't know in what capacity he will work in government, but he will kind of have thought leadership. So I want to juxtapose basically the case studies with the thinking, because to make many of these things happen, Dhananath, you will have to significantly invest and expand our digital public infrastructure. Now we have seen what it has done in India, not only to bring benefits and targeted economic assistance to very poor people, but it's a huge game changer for those people, because digital platforms and digital channels do more for the poor people, because their time has a huge opportunity cost. And if you take even in Sri Lanka, the provision of public services, most people have to take leave, they give up. And don't forget that something like 65 to 70% of workforce is daily paid. So when they need any service, etc., the opportunity cost of their time is very, very high. So the digital public infrastructure, which we have been talking about for so long, if that comes in, it's a significant growth multiplier. It will increase competitive intensity, because contestability for customers will increase, because there are certain businesses where there are certain KYCs and digitally onboarding can become now possible. So contestability and choice for most consumers will be higher. So this national digital ID, which we have been talking for 20 years, hopefully will come into being. And then we have to digitize on the land the BIM which has a cadastral system. We have only done 18% of it. So there's a whole bunch of things that can be done to significantly improve productivity. I mean, if there was one single theme that could improve productivity, also it reduces corruption vulnerabilities. So that whole digitization strategy of this government has a huge role, not only in improving productivity, but increasing the quality of service to a lot of our people. And it will also create many new business models and create new markets. So this is why that fireside chat with Hans, to really understand what his thinking is and how AI can play a role, hopefully we can discover what's on his mind.
So that's why you have to be there, because if you are also finding it difficult, struggling to get some permits when you are going to do businesses, and then you can get and you can question Hans on like what is his big ideas, what are his big ideas on how he's going to tackle this problem, because as Murtaza said, it also reduces the corruption vulnerability. So buy tickets, go to ignite.advocata.org and the link is in the description. Go and buy tickets, and you have a special offer till midnight today, and I can see some of the people have already purchased tickets watching our live session. Thank you very much. So please make sure that you buy tickets and you have a special offer again, and you have the access for the entire agenda and the speaker profiles in our website, the special website, that's ignite.advocata.org. And as again, those who joined us now, we have 2-day session, 22nd and 23rd of January, at the BMICH, about discussing all about growth, because growth is not happening like in first year, second year. It takes a decade to happen, and we are targeting uplifting entire Sri Lankans living standard by economic growth, through economic growth. So we have to have the first principles thinking to think about growth and industries and improving the productivity and understanding everything about growth. So if you are a policymaker, if you are a member of a political party thinking about these big issues, please contact us and buy tickets and join the conference. It's a worthwhile investment. 20,000 rupees all inclusive. Again, as I mentioned it to you before, we are not keeping big margins. It's all on food and rest of the logistical cost. So please join us on 22nd and 23rd. So Murtaza, afterwards, after the tea break, after Han's session, we are going to discuss another 3 case studies. First, in lean practices in hotel management. Tell us about a little bit about the speaker, and you have been a director at a key hotel chain in Sri Lanka. Why lean practice matters, and what are we going to explore on this session?
So I think before that session, there is a conversation with Jan Mishker. Jan Mishker is from the McKinsey Global Institute. And this is a global think tank, part of McKinsey Consulting. Its work is paid by the partners of McKinsey. McKinsey is the leading management consulting firm in the world. And they have been in operation for many, many decades. And they created this McKinsey Global Institute because what they found was that in their management consulting work, they realized that they also should advise government on public policy. Right? Because they found that when they were advising companies, there were limits of what companies on their own would do. And there was an enabling environment that governments also had to do through public policy. So that's how the McKinsey Global Institute came around. And I remember reading a book called Power of Productivity, which was written, one of the co-authors was the head of the McKinsey Global Institute, was a nuclear physicist. His name, I forget. So Jan works for them, and they do country productivity studies and industry productivity studies. So they have recently released a report on productivity. So I want him to share with us the findings of that productivity report globally about what are some of the drivers of productivity and the type of public policy that needs to be enacted to increase productivity growth. One of the key things that they have always advocated is governments should put the interests of consumers. No government in Sri Lanka has put the interests of consumers. It is always that the producers that knock on the door of the politicians, because we have had this vicious cycle of the type of political system we have in this country, Dhananath, that requires a lot of money to be in politics, because our electorate sizes are large. You need a lot of money to be in politics. And invariably, it is the business people who are funding the politicians who then are obliged to these people and keep up a protectionist rent-seeking system that privileges a few people, which is also what Stefan Durkheim is talking about, the elite bargain. That, is it a few people who get the spoils of a country, or do you focus on really uplifting the lives of people? So the productivity, McKinsey's focus is put the consumer. Government should look at the interests of the consumers.
So that's why the importance of Jan Mishka's session. That's a second keynote on the date on day 2. Like the second, we have 2 keynotes, day 1 and day 2. So this is the second keynote by Jan Mishka, and he's from Switzerland, right?
Yeah.
He's from Switzerland.
He's in the European unit of the McKinsey Global Institute, but I think he's Swiss.
So join us again, buy tickets, and you have a special offer till midnight today. And then we have the case studies about transforming retailing through modern trade with Charita Subasinghe, who is the president retail at John Keel's Holdings. So why retail sector, and how does it impact on growth story in Sri Lanka?
So if you take a factory gate price of a product, by the time it comes to the retail point, the price goes up between 50% and 100%. Similarly, in agricultural produce, that the farm gate price and the price that is paid by the consumer, there is a significant jump. Now, modern retailing is involved in 2 things. The whole logistics from the point of manufacturing and merchandising the items, selecting what should be bought, negotiating, displaying it, so that the consumer gets better prices, because with scale, efficiencies come in, especially on the logistics side. So for example, modern retailing, the supermarkets can get products from farmer to consumer in less than 24 hours. While the traditional system will take 48 hours or more. The wastage, which is a huge problem in Sri Lanka's agricultural value chain, can be significantly reduced by modern retailing, because they have invested in infrastructure, cold storage, centralized storage, automation, packaging. So, those efficiency gains, part of it will obviously come to the companies offering that service, but part of it is also going to get transmitted to consumers in lower prices. So, a key element of productivity is reducing waste and reducing the number of intermediaries. So, modern retailing, which in the supermarket industry, in groceries, is only about 20% penetration, is fundamental to control the cost of living. And it is an anti-inflation, supply side anti-inflationary mechanism.
So that's the importance of understanding about the retail sector. And Charita Subasinghe will be with us and discussing about the success story of Keels and how we can improve further on the productivity aspects of the retail sector. And then we are moving on the lean practices in the hotel management. And tell us, because we have one session before, which is on with the bookings.com on improving the productivity with the platform companies, and again we are discussing about the lean practices in hotel management. Why it is important, we all know the tourism sector is a growing sector, and Murtaza, you have been in the board of one of the main hotel chains in Sri Lanka. Tell us why it is important and how can the tourism sector can get benefited, and if you are a representative from the tourism sector, why someone from that sector should be in this session.
Incidentally, even the hotel sector has a shortage of labor, right? Because a lot of Sri Lankan labor has left the country. Just to give you some metrics, Holiday Inn Express has a labor ratio of 0.3 labor to 1 room. I believe in the Cinnamon Group, Cinnamon Red, which is a more value-oriented proposition, has a rate of about 0.8 because they don't have banqueting and all of that. And some of the more inefficient hotels could be 1.5 to, of course, if you have banqueting, etc., you have a much higher labor, but then that's for a different activity. So I don't think, Dhananath, that although our hoteliers basically think that their path to profitability is through higher rates, tourism is also a tradable product. Like our people have realized now in Sri Lanka that we have increased all our prices, but the level of tourists did not come. They are coming at the informal sector level, but the higher end, they only achieved about 80% occupancy during the peak period. Because we increased our prices, the consumers didn't respond like that. And some of the markets, like the Russians, there was a depreciation in the ruble, etc. So we need to learn how to build cheaper hotels, and we have discussed this in Advocata, all the protectionism that is done on construction materials, how is driving up the cost of building. So we need to learn how to build cheaper hotels. You can build hotels in Thailand 30% cheaper than we can build in Sri Lanka. And how to operate these hotels at low cost, right? So, I remember reading a Cornell Hospitality book. They are the premier hospitality school in the world, about the difference between hospitality and service. Sri Lankans are very good at hospitality. We smile and we are bowing and cowing, but it's a separate thing about service. The service simply means fit for purpose and consistency. We don't score well on service because a lot of times it's inconsistent. So lean management is fundamental to take out waste. And lean came from the Toyota production system, which is talking about 7 types of waste. And if you really start thinking about lean practices, you'll be surprised, even in hotels, because typical hotel managers are not trained to think like that. And I believe the person from Cinnamon who is going to give a presentation is an engineer. So I was chatting to him and I said, I also studied engineering. I know how I think, and I can see how you have brought in that expertise to hotels. Because the typical hotel general manager does not think like that.
So that's why if you are a hotelier, you have to be in this session, because if you want to make better profits, it's not all about increasing the price, because we are in a competitive environment. We have to make ourselves productive, and you have to get your staff to think on those metrics on how to improve productivity, and that's why you should be there for our case study 5 on lean practices in hotel management. And then we are moving to agriculture, and Sri Lanka always has been talking about agriculture, and we are getting Miller Alexander Rajendran, the co-founder and CEO of Zenzagro Solutions. And we have been talking about this already. There's a rice problem in Sri Lanka. There has been an eggs problem in Sri Lanka. There's a coconut problem. So, Murtaza, what can we expect from this agriculture session, precision agriculture, and what is going to come out from this session?
So Sense is a startup company. Its holding company is an Internet of Things company, and the founders are all tech guys. So even Miller is, I think, from Jaffna University in computer science or computer engineering. But they have pivoted to how to use Internet of Things and technology to do precision agriculture. So again, in agriculture, Sri Lanka's productivity is very, very low. So Miller will share with a few case studies of how they have intervened with ordinary farmers all over Sri Lanka to improve their productivity. So as you know, Dhananath, that we have a fundamental problem about our land plot size. Most of our farmers, the plot size is less than 1 acre. While if you go in the West, the farms are huge. You know, in the United States, if you take like wheat growing, they're like 10,000 acres. So we have to use very efficient use of resources and how to use information technology and census, because agriculture, to my understanding, is actually a scientific pursuit. So Miller will share with us what kind of solutions they have implemented for ordinary farmers in Sri Lanka.
Okay, so that's about the agriculture, and then our final session would be on building cheaper highways, and that would be with engineer Dhammika Deshapriya, who's the general manager and head of structural designs at Access Engineering PLC. Of course, we all know Sri Lankans wanted highways, and there was we are going to in the day one we are going to discuss about with the national physical planning division on what's the infrastructure plan looks like. So Murtaza, why someone should be in this session, because not the many businessmen are going to build highways, but why someone should spend till 5 in the evening to understand about highways?
Some highways, Dhananath, in Sri Lanka have been done at globally competitive prices. There are a number of highways that have been built double what it should have cost. That is purely the cost of corruption, right? Now, you don't have to value engineer issues that are created due to corruption. That needs a separate solution, and the simple solution is to have transparent procurement system. And one of the recommendations of the IMF's governance diagnostic assessment is to enact a procurement law, which yet to be done. So the simple answer is how to reduce the cost is tender. Now, if you tender, then it's competition, right? So all the contractors have the same input cost. Right? So part of how to win the tender is to improve productivity, how you build it, which is a point of discussion that will probably come up. But it will also be about value engineering the design. So value engineering means that, you know, how do you do again more with less? There's a lot of waste also that happens. You over design. So how do you design fit for purpose? And that only happens under competition, because when you have to compete to win, you have to, it pushes you to the limit, right? And that is how the improvement comes. So that presentation will be given by a head of design from Access Engineering, where he will share with us how they have figured out how to lower the cost through value engineering.
So anyone who is planning to build something, and in this industry through value engineering, how can you bring down the cost is something that you definitely need to understand. So please join us on 22nd and 23rd, and I think you went through the entire program. Day one with a more policy focus and understanding the constraints for growth, and day two is all about case studies, understanding of how we can improve the productivity. And that would be the future for Sri Lanka, because we know it is not easy to grow the economy. It's sometimes it's not easy to stabilize as well, but at least we have passed that stabilization stage, and now it's the growth stage, and only through growth we can make Sri Lanka a developed country. And that's why we are taking the lead on setting the growth tone for Sri Lanka, and it's for all policymakers. So please visit us, and at the same time, it's for all businessmen, and it's for all students. If you are interested, join us. And if you are in the policy development, if you are a university professor, lecturer, this would be the most recent updated content to think about Sri Lanka's growth and the growth model. Murtaza, any final thoughts? What's your sales pitch for someone from your business world? Why they should be there, and who do you think what should be? I mean, if you are considering to join the conference, who would benefit from joining, spending these 2 days? What is the target audience that you would like to pitch? And any final thoughts?
Famously, John F. Kennedy said, ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. Now, there is a chattering class, especially in Colombo, who are ever ready to criticize, to complain. But they don't have solutions. Now we are out of our crisis. We have achieved macro stabilization. The question is that how do we come together collectively and contribute to our country so that it grows in a sustainable way where all of us have a brighter future, including the generations to come. Because I don't want my generation to leave a huge pile of debt to the future generation. So the conference that we have organized is targeted towards elevating the quality of debate and discussion in terms of economic policy. So this is not only targeted at policymakers, it is also targeted to the general public and those of us who are interested in the future of this country, so that there is a meaningful debate, because the politicians and the leaders of our country cannot take us. Ultimately, they react to the people. But if the people are asking the right kind of questions, are driving the discussion in the right direction, then it is up to the politicians and the leaders of our society to then drive us in that direction. And it is in that context that you may want to invest 20,000 rupees and most importantly 2 days of your time to come and join us, so that you can also participate in the discussion but also improve your knowledge of how we should develop this country.
Thank you very much. So that's the pitch from our end. So buy tickets. The link is in the description. Ignite.advocata.org is the website, and you have the access for the entire agenda and the speaker profiles. And as I mentioned, the uniqueness is we are bringing solid content. It's, as Murtaza mentioned, it's not about complaining. We are giving you the knowledge and we are discussing the knowledge, and it's a learning experience. And we are not about having extended panel discussions, considering about opinion. We are about knowledge and understanding the first principles and what sectors that we have to prioritize, and also combining the government and also the private sector together. So please buy tickets. Thank you very much who have already bought tickets today through our live conversation. You will get our merch gift. You can collect it at the event day at our registration desk. So buy tickets is 20,000 as we mentioned, and you have the access for the agenda again. And at the same time, please make sure that pass the message across, and you can buy tickets. It's on the 22nd and the 23rd, so you have about 2 weeks to buy tickets, but don't wait till the last minute, because we have limited seats. We have only about 150 to 160 seats at the venue. It's not like the largest conference hall. We are having it at the Lotus Hall at the BMICH. So we have 150 to 160 tickets maximum. So please purchase tickets through our link. And at the same time, if you buy it today, before 12 o'clock, you have a special gift. Thank you very much, Murtaza, for explaining the entire agenda, so you know what you are getting. And 2 keynote speakers, again to recap, Stefan Durkon and Jan Mishka. Solid content and covering a lot of areas, and it will all about knowledge and taking Sri Lanka to the next inning of growth. So join us 22nd and 23rd, and see you at Ignite Growth Conference 2023. Thank you very much.